Welcome back to Anxious Faith. I'm James Burke. We're excited this episode to be speaking with Jemimah, who's a student here in Melbourne, and talking about her experiences with anxiety, but also with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is something that is really misunderstood, I think, when we're talking about mental health. Anxiety, everyone knows what we're talking about, and we focused a lot on anxiety when it comes to how that plays out with our faith and our life here on Anxious Faith. But anxiety is not the only mental health condition, and generalized anxiety, which is what we've spoken about a lot, is also not the only type of anxiety condition. Obsessive compulsive disorder is something that is pretty huge and pretty life impacting. It's not what we often think of what it is when people say, oh, I have OCD. So really excited to hear Jemimah's story today and talk about how your experiences with it have played out in your life and what that's taught you in your faith and things like that. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start out a bit. Why don't you just share a bit about your story, about how you first came to be aware of the fact that you were struggling with your mental health and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've come from a Christian home with parents who kind of raised us in church and stuff like that. And I've also come from a background of a pretty good understanding of mental health. My mum's a clinical psychologist, and my dad's a social worker working with mental health. So I think I had a very good understanding, or what I thought was a pretty good understanding of mental health. And so in high school, when I started feeling really anxious about social situations, anxious about my schoolwork, I went home and said I'd like to see a psychologist.
Yeah, wow.
So it was something that had definitely been something I didn't find hard to kind of start exploring as soon as I started feeling anxiety that felt a bit overwhelming. And I think back then it was actually pretty manageable and pretty typical anxiety.
Yep.
I think school can already be, I think a lot of kids at school already find they struggle with anxiety, even if it's not something huge. Yeah, and so along that, I had been seeing psychologists on and off when I'm feeling anxious, but coping pretty well. And then it was only until I had finished high school as an adult at 18 that my anxiety grew into something very different and not manageable anymore. And it felt very overwhelming. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Then you've been pretty lucky to have grown up then with kind of the language and the vocabulary and the understanding of what mental health is, to identifying yourself, hey, this is something I can't manage with. I need to go see some help. So yeah, that's, in some ways puts you a step ahead of some people that struggle with knowing what is actually going on with me. But it's interesting then that even with that knowledge about what anxiety is and that kind of self-awareness that, hey, this is impacting me, and even with the help you saw, it then still kind of grew to something that wasn't manageable. What was that like?
Yeah, so my understanding of obsessive compulsive disorder is that it's kind of a genetic thing that you can be predisposed to.
Yep.
And then typically people with OCD go through an event that's very stressful, sometimes a traumatic event that kind of causes this OCD to develop. And so after high school being, it was kind of COVID-19, it was I'm in lockdowns, my plans, a really highly stressful situation that the anxiety I'd always had developed into something really different and into the symptoms of OCD, which do have overlap with anxiety, but are also very unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a step back then, because I think this will probably help us, in the rest of the conversation going forward. Let's talk about what OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, actually is. Because like I was kind of saying in the intro, a lot of people think, it means that I have to have my books lined up perfectly on the bookshelf, or I have to, make sure that everything matches, that kind of stuff. It all lines up. I'm a bit OCD. You hear that said a lot, kind of thing. But, what actually is obsessive compulsive disorder in your experience?
Yeah, and I absolutely had that same misconception of growing up in school, like having all your pens lined straight. Oh, I'm so OCD. So when I was seeing a psychologist and I was spending a lot of time talking about my symptoms and my thoughts and my anxieties, she posed that, do you think it's possible that this is OCD? And I was thinking, I am the messiest, most disorganized person I have ever met. I am definitely not. I don't have OCD. And I also thought, I don't want to waste my time exploring this diagnosis that I'm not going to have. Like, I'm paying to be here. I'd like to have my time.
I'm just anxious. I just need help with my anxiety. It's not that. Let's just focus on this.
Exactly. And then it was later on that I think she was more persistent, and she said, I actually really think that this could be OCD, and I really think it's worth exploring. And I was much more open to it at that point because I'd spent a lot of time with her. So I had to fill out a very long questionnaire. We went through a few testing and discussions, and then she said, your symptoms are very compatible with the diagnosis of OCD.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So let's break that down. So obsessive compulsive disorder, if it's not the being a neat freak or that kind of stuff, what actually is it? Are you able to explain it kind of in a general idea of what the disorder is?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to obsessive compulsive disorder. There's the obsessions, which is in regards to like the obsessive thoughts and often called intrusive thoughts, which are thoughts that are unwanted and really hard to get rid of.
Yep.
And then the compulsions. And so these compulsions come from the obsessions. So, for example, I think I've left the oven on and I will not be able to settle or think about anything else until I've gone home and checked. And for people with severe OCD, that means checking 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, so that's it. It's this intrusive thought that, this is going to happen or this has happened, which is sometimes how it can start with just the obsessive thought. And then that starts to create more and more stress for you and develop these compulsions. And that's where sometimes people might have seen the example of, or someone has to, lock the door a certain number of times or things like that each day before they leave the house or something like that, because in their mind there is this intrusive thought that if the door is not locked and if I'm 100% sure the door is not locked, something terrible might happen to my friends or family. It might mean I'm burgled. It might mean the house burns down if I leave the oven on, that kind of stuff. And so get stuck in this pattern of having to check because what if? And my understanding is that it's kind of when it gets to that point of actually your compulsions are impacting your life, that's when it kind of moves into actually the disorder of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone does have intrusive thoughts and everybody does have that kind of worry. But for people with OCD, it is so consuming and the anxiety is so severe that it feels... and the other part is that the thoughts are unwanted. And so often I think when we talk about intrusive thoughts, I think everybody can experience kind of the general intrusive thought of you're driving a car and like, what if I just spun the wheel?
Yeah.
But for people with OCD, that thought happens and then that thought is going over and over and over. And it's really hard to break out of that cycle.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from, some of my reading, the only way to stop that cycle of thinking is to actually do the compulsion, which then leads to this vicious feedback loop where, the more you do the compulsion, the more that means the obsession hasn't happened. And so you think you're actually doing the right thing because, I've done the compulsion. That intrusive thought didn't actually come true. I need to then keep doing the compulsion to make sure it then never comes true. Yeah. And it just grows and escalates from there. If you're willing to, what was your OCD centered around?
Yeah. So when I first started seeing the psychologist, a lot of what I was talking about were these intrusive thoughts of I would go to a birthday party and I would think nobody wants me here. And then I think someone else with maybe generalized anxiety might be able to kind of talk themselves out of, well, I have my friends here and everything's going to be okay, and maybe settle themselves. But this thought would become so incessant that I was completely consumed by it and felt such severe anxiety that I just had to leave. Yeah. And just this feeling of being out of control of my own thoughts. And from that, kind of the starting point of those intrusive thoughts developed into stronger obsessions and then eventually compulsions as well. I think a really important thing to note is that OCD is illogical. It doesn't make sense. Yep. And I think a lot of the times when I would talk to people about my obsessions and compulsions, they would say, well, that doesn't really make sense. I go, well, OCD doesn't really make sense. And so a lot of my fears were around food.
Okay.
So I was really scared of, it's called contamination OCD.
Okay.
So scared of feeling contaminated by the feelings of food or food being places, such as my room, such as my bed, such as touching me. And then if they were that, like rats and cockroaches and bugs would come, and everything would be infested. And so I would be thinking, oh, I think my room might be unclean. I think I had food in here or something. And then I would think, oh my gosh, there's mice in all of the walls and they're everywhere and I can feel they're going to come. And then it would lead to the compulsion of, I need to vacuum my room. I need to change my sheets. I need to kind of cleanse the space again, wipe down all the surfaces. And it was completely illogical a lot of the time.
Yeah. And how kind of far did that go? Like, was that something that where you'd find yourself constantly having to re-clean your room, even though, like you say, from a logical perspective, the room was already clean, but that intrusive thought wouldn't go away? Would you have to keep cleaning the room again?
Yeah. And that's part of it, is that there's often times where you cannot complete the compulsion. And so there'll be the obsession. And when you can't complete the compulsion, there's this severe anxiety. And so there'd be times where I don't even remember why. I think they were renovating and my mum had a nap in my bed just innocently, and she feels terrible now. But this thought of like my mum, what if my mum hadn't been cleaned, and like what if I am really good at diligently keeping myself uncontaminated, but someone uncontaminated stepped into my space and now the space is contaminated, and I could not even fathom cleaning it, and I had a complete meltdown.
Yeah, wow.
And it was that was probably the peak of feeling completely out of control, and completely out of control of my own thoughts.
That's really interesting how you say about often OCD can come out of a traumatic experience or a stressful situation, and the timing for you especially kind of thing. This is in the midst of something unprecedented. We're sick of that word. We're all in lockdown. We're all struggling to comprehend what a global pandemic actually looks like. And it's no wonder that that was a stressful time, and that kind of triggered things off. That's kind of you say that's kind of the deepest or the worst point that it got to, kind of thing. How did you start to work at managing your OCD?
Yeah, so there's probably two aspects. There's like the psychology aspect of working with my psychologist, and then there's also my faith, of how I worked through with my faith. So in regards to the psychologist, a lot of it was exposure therapy, which is really difficult. Yeah. But putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation, pushing yourself to not complete the compulsion, even if it's just putting off the compulsion of a lot of what my psychologist challenged me is, I think I need to change my sheets. Can I do that in an hour? Can I do that in 2 hours? And then the longer you can force yourself to sit in that uncomfortable feeling, it's really helpful. So a lot of those kinds of therapies with my psychologist, and then also medication as well was something that down the line I explored, which has been really beneficial. So my medication is sometimes used for depression as well, but it's also specifically an OCD medication. And that's been extremely helpful for me as well.
Yeah. So is that something then, just to help us understand a bit better, you say that exposure therapy was having the intrusive thought of I need to clean, or my bed is contaminated, I need to go change the sheets. And if the exposure therapy was then, well, maybe I'll leave that an hour or 2 hours. Was it at the point then where when you had that thought, you would immediately have to kind of drop whatever you were doing and go and change your sheets and clean your room at that time?
Yeah, it was initially. And so that was, as soon as you'd had the intrusive thought, the anxiety just keeps building until you complete it. Wow. So yeah, you've got to, sometimes I could sit with the anxiety for a little bit, but other times the anxiety was severe from the start, and I just had to go and complete it straight away.
Which, all of a sudden you begin to realize how life affecting that can be, kind of thing, because you might be doing something completely different, and then that intrusive thought, that unwanted thought comes into your mind, and the anxiety is just going to increase until you're able to complete the compulsion. And if you're not able to do that, well, then the anxiety just keeps increasing, like you say.
And just exhausting.
Well, that's it. It's, I can imagine that's something that your mind is constantly going and not shutting down, which, is something that leads to that physical exhaustion, not just that mental and emotional exhaustion. How long did it kind of take you to kind of not necessarily become better from your OCD, but at least for it to become manageable for you through the through the medication and through the exposure therapy with your psychologist?
Yeah, probably about a year from first being diagnosed to a year later was probably the biggest of changes. And so today I definitely still do have OCD, but it looks so much different than it did when it was the hardest. Which is actually, it's nice to reflect back on and think that I used to be a lot worse, and that I still have kind of freakouts and thoughts. I called Ethan, telling him I think there's a frog in my wardrobe recently, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, why would there be a frog in your wardrobe?" And then we had to go through the whole wardrobe and pull everything out and like touch everything until I was convinced it wasn't there anymore. So that was, I think, months before I like would go a couple months until having another kind of one of those big moments of feeling really upset, from when it used to be like once a day.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And so I think it gives me hope as well that as I'm getting better, I think I'll also be getting better into the future of maybe it'll be once every few months and then maybe once a year.
Yeah. Or even it's there, but you've learned to be able to sit in that anxiety and know that the intrusive thought is not going to actually come true if you don't get to the compulsion kind of thing. You can kind of talk back to yourself, go, no, there's not actually a frog in my wardrobe.
Yeah.
How would there be a frog in my wardrobe? I don't actually need to go and check every single surface in the wardrobe. Yeah, that's and that it's a pretty full-on thing, to be honest. Because I think sometimes the difference between like a normal kind of generalized or social anxiety and things like that is because it's so internalized. It doesn't necessarily affect what you have to do besides you know, often just want to retreat and withdraw and kind of hide away, whereas this is something that's, you know, almost forcing you to, I have to go and do this now. And so when, you know, if that strikes when you're out, then that's even worse kind of thing, especially if it's like, oh, I'm out of the house and my room's contaminated. I need to go and clean it now.
Yeah.
I'm at uni, or, you know, I'm at church or something like that kind of thing. I can't go and do that, which just kind of adds this whole new level again. So I commend you on the fact that you've made so much progress and you've been able to deal with it as well as you can. You said there was another part to how you learnt to deal with your OCD, and that was your faith, which would be really cool to hear. But just take us back a couple of steps and tell us a bit of your faith story as well, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, growing up in a Christian family, attending church, I gave my life to Jesus. My parents say when I was 3 years old. I'm not sure if at 3 you can maybe fully understand the weight of your decision. So I would say more like maybe 10, 11. Yeah. And then I was baptized when I was 13 and proclaimed my faith to my church. And I think there's, even through the darkest of my OCD, there was never any doubt that God was there. The doubt was, is God listening? Does God care? But there was this assurance I think I've always had that God is there. And there wasn't this kind of question of that. Yeah. And then, funny enough, when I was dealing with my OCD, I was at Bible college. And so I had felt in year 12 a calling from God to go study his word.
Yeah, wow.
I felt really sure of that. And I still do think that was the right decision. And I was doing a Bachelor of Theology that then goes online and we go into COVID. And so as I'm dealing with this and kind of really grappling with my faith, I'm also doing assignments on the Bible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really hard. I also think it was a good thing because I was in such a supportive Bible college that really understood my struggles. I had lecturers praying for me.
Wow.
Just so much grace was given to me during that time. And while I was still figuring out what my mental health was or what's going on, I didn't have answers yet to give them. They were still incredibly understanding. Yeah, and I was also doing an internship at my church, if you can believe this, that as soon as I'm going to go through this huge mental health crisis, God's put an internship in front of me, Bible college, my church. So I am like all supported from all corners. And so I also did step back from the internship, but the youth pastor I was interning under was also incredibly understanding and had a really good understanding of mental health. And so when I reached out and spoke about that I felt very well received when sharing about it generally within the church.
Which is amazing to hear because, part of the reason anxious faith exists is because there hasn't always been that understanding when people have shared about it in the church. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is to make sure that more people have an experience more like yours, where they go to their pastor or their youth pastor and say, hey, this is something I'm really struggling with. And that person is actually somewhat equipped, or at least knowledgeable enough, to be able to have a conversation that is understanding and supportive to the person who's opened up about what they're going through. So that's amazing to hear that you went through that. But like you say, like you never really questioned that whether God was there or not, but about whether he cared and things like that. Did that kind of come out of the fact that you go, okay, well, I'm feeling this calling to go and study your word. I'm going to enroll in Bible college. And now all of a sudden I have to deal with this?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a lot. And it's such an interesting disorder to have this problem with as well. Because of OCD, your thoughts are out of control and intrusive. And so when I'm having these thoughts about what's going on, I'm also not in full control of my own thoughts and anxieties. Yeah. And so a lot of what I felt was this feeling of being alone, of feeling like I'm trapped in my own head, and I can't explain to anyone else what this feels like, but it's so scary. And I can't hear God, and I can't sense where he is, because my own head is so full. And it was really terrifying. And then feeling like I don't know how to reach out as well. I know that God will listen if I reach out, but I don't even know how to talk to him anymore. It's so hard.
Yeah. That's honestly, I've been in that kind of place as well, of not doubting whether he's there, but I don't see you in this space, God. I don't see you at work. I don't know if you care, even though in my head I know that you say you care and you don't leave us and forsake us. How did you get through that space? Yeah,
it's hard. And a lot of what I had was, when speaking to Christians about it, was often, can I pray for you? Which I love. I love that about us. But sometimes I would just feel like, because I would think, oh my goodness, they're going to be disappointed when nothing happens, when I don't get healed. And it's really hard for me to have false hope. So a lot of it I had was just, I'm not going to get healed. I'm just going to let them pray for me, and I'm not going to think about it. And then it'll be over. Yeah. And, obviously I'm still having OCD, so I haven't been healed, and I've been prayed for healing a lot of times. But there are moments where I think, I wish someone could have prayed, what can I be praying that would help you right now? Or what could I be doing to support you right now? And I do absolutely believe in the power of God's prayer, the power of God to heal people. But I worry that if we maybe make that too much of an emphasis, it can feel really disheartening. And it felt really disappointing to me when I had felt like, I'm following your word, God. I'm at Bible college. I'm following your plan for my life. I'm having all these people pray for healing over me. I'm praying, I'm calling out, and I am still waking up every day with these intrusive thoughts.
So, I can imagine that that's a really difficult place, because obviously, you're surrounded by all these Christians that are helping you and have the best of intentions and are praying for you. Like you say, you love the fact that that's what we do for each other. But you're kind of in this headspace of, this isn't going to change anything, because I'm still waking up every morning. I'm still having these intrusive thoughts. And we know from what you've said before as well that it's not like your OCD has gone away. You still deal with it to some extent. So is that a space that you've been able to go through? And if so, what was the kind of the way out of that? Or, is it something you're still dealing with?
Yeah, good question. I definitely realize now in hindsight that I was really closing myself off. And so when people were asking for prayer, I wasn't having a good heart about it, and I wasn't, being open to listening to God. And so a big part of, I think, my journey is understanding that I'm not abandoned, and God didn't do nothing, because he did do something. He sent Jesus to atone for my sins, and so that I can be in relationship with him. And he is doing something every day when he's with me and when he's walking with me. And that was a game changer. It was a big sign of not being like, why aren't you doing anything, God? But to realize there is so much that he is doing. Putting me in spaces where I'm so well supported, putting people in my life to be there for me. being with me, giving me peace. Yeah. And I think prayer, funny enough, prayer became the biggest thing for me.
Wow.
Of that being able to pray. I started waking up every morning, and when I'd wake up, I'd say, God, can we do this day together? Or can you please walk with me through today? Today feels really scary and I'm not sure what it's going to be like, but can we just do it together? And then when I'm starting to feel anxious, be like, God, can you just be here right now, just with me? And then just this feeling of being able to do it together. Yeah. And also this often in these kind of thought spirals, we talked a little bit about like the intrusive thoughts. I think a lot of my intrusive thoughts were this kind of spiral of I have one thought and it would lead to another and it would just go down and down and down in this spiral that I felt like I couldn't get out of. And there'd be times when I was spiraling and I was having really, really anxious thoughts and I felt like I needed to pray, but I couldn't quite get the words out, and I would just call out God. And there's been times where it is completely silenced and I have just felt this like overwhelming peace. And there's been times where it hasn't, but I felt this presence of God and I have managed to pull back out of that. Yeah.
And it's amazing how, that's one of the things he says in his word that, there's times where we don't know what to pray and his Spirit intercedes for us.
Yeah.
And having such a clear experience of that must be so encouraging that, even though it doesn't happen all the time, there's those times where you have felt his peace come on you kind of thing, which is so reassuring and, like it says, transcends all understanding kind of thing, because you go, well, hang on, my mind was doing this a second ago kind of thing, and now it's calm and it's peaceful. Do you find yourself that as your OCD is being better managed, I don't want to say getting better, but you're managing it better, do you find that you still sometimes end up back in that place, or has that been a journey where you've been able to better understand, again, what God has done for you as opposed to what he might not be doing in the immediate right in front of you?
Yeah, I definitely think that I kind of had this expectation that it was God's responsibility for our relationship. And so I think, a big challenge for me is seeing that it is a two-sided relationship and I need to be putting in a lot of work for that relationship as well, and not just expecting when I'm going through something, you better be showing up for me, God. And that's still something I'm dealing with I need to be spending time with God and I need to be reading his word. And I need to be listening. And I need to not just be praying and calling out for answers, but then actually spending time listening. And so that's definitely something I'm still going through now, and I still definitely need to be doing better.
I think we all need to be doing better in those things, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think any of us are ever going to be able to say I am doing everything I can from my side of the relationship with God, because we're human. But it's really encouraging to hear that learning that it's that two-way relationship, and also learning about reframing it to seeing what he has done and how much he is doing, as opposed to he's not showing up in this circumstance kind of thing when he has already done so much. Are there certain passages or certain verses in the Bible kind of thing that kind of help ground you in that kind of thing and help reassure you in that?
Yeah. When I was really struggling, I had someone write me this letter, and they wrote in it, "Cast your burdens onto Jesus, for he cares for you." And they had no idea what was going on, but it was just, it felt, and it also felt like, wow, my burden's really big. But that God is bigger. Yeah. And also that he cares and that he doesn't want me to be walking in this alone. Yeah. Yeah. And lots of, kind of passage encouragements of, you see the birds and you see how he loves and cares for the birds, and how much more does he love and care for you? Yeah. And that even if he's not taking away things from me, but that he is caring so much and he is there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of ties back to a previous episode we've done where we looked at gratitude, about how recognizing that, it's not about being in a positive mindset and thankful for what God has done, but that gratitude of the Lord is near. He sent his son. We have freedom in Christ to, be restored in relationship with him. And that gratitude shifts our perspective from, in the midst of, a really bad period of your OCD or, bad period of anxiety, where all you can kind of see is what's in front of you and what you're struggling with, to be able to lift your perspective and be reminded that, hey, actually, you've said that, you look after the animals of the field and how much more are you going to look after me? Being able to shift your perspective and see what God does and being reminded of those verses is huge. And I love that verse about, cast your burdens on him, because we sometimes think, oh no, but our burden's too big. But it's not a conditional. It's not a pass me your little burdens and I'll carry them for you. It's cast all your burdens, regardless of the size. And like, if anyone can take it, God can take it, right?
Yeah. How much bigger is God?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about this kind of duality of intrusive thoughts. And you said that, when you're struggling with your OCD, you feel like you're not in control of your mind. Because one of the things that immediately makes me think about is, Romans 12:2 talks about, that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind in Christ. And sometimes, from my experience, it can be hard sometimes to be reading something in the Bible that says, well, this is what's going to be happening, or this is what, this is what's going to happen. But that's not what it's going on right now. Has there been any of that where you've kind of been going, how am I supposed to have my mind renewed and transformed in Christ if the OCD is still there and I'm still having these unwanted, intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. There definitely is. And it kind of reminds me something about my mum says when talking about kind of physical illnesses and the difference between mental illnesses and physical illnesses. She always says, but the mind, like the brain is the body. Like the brain is part of the body and the mind is part of the body. And so I think, and as you said, it can be really hard feeling like out of control of your own mind. And this is a space where God's supposed to have sovereignty over, and I don't even feel control. But I think there's a piece of knowing that we all have something physical or mental that we are finding ailment with, and that in heaven with our new bodies and with our new minds, our mind's part of the body, that there will be that renewing.
That simple thought of the brain's part of the body, because so often we think about it, in physical health versus mental health. The brain is part of the physical body. That is part of our body, and like you say, we're going to have new bodies. We're going to be in that place where we have no illness and no suffering and things like that, and we are going to experience that one day, which is, I guess, one of those hopes that we get to cling on to even when it's dark around us, is that there is that eternal hope to hold on to. Going back a bit, you were saying about how when you started opening up in church, people would often just want to pray for you, which was great, but sometimes would make you feel a bit, what, and this is more to help someone that, is in church and might have someone kind of open up to them or start sharing to them about that. But what would have been a different way to respond to that, or what would have been a more helpful way to respond to that in that space for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing is listening. I think, and really active listening, because everybody's mental health story is going to be a little bit different. And mine certainly was different from anything I'd heard at that time. Yeah. And then in regards to praying, I think I felt this, instead of just praying for healing or praying, oh God, just take this away from Jemimah, which I think there definitely is helpful and still is valid. Just praying of, can you please be with Jemimah this week? Or can you please bring people to be with Jemimah this week when she's going through those things? Or how can I be supporting and blessing you? Yeah. And as I said, listening. I think even just having someone listen and be really understanding, was really important for me as well. Yeah.
Are there practical things that would have helped during that time, or with OCD, because it's something so much that is, trapped within your mind, so to speak, kind of thing, that physical side of things where we can sometimes say with other mental health conditions, I'll show up and do the physical things for you kind of thing. Yeah. Does that still apply to OCD as well?
Yeah, interesting. I think partly because OCD is so hard to explain, I think I never understood it until I had it. And still today when I'm talking to people, I think I know I'm butchering this explanation. It's so hard to explain. A lot of it, when I was trying to explain what would help me, was really hard for people to understand, having to understand the disorder, And sometimes that it would be completely illogical and having to understand this doesn't seem like it would help you, but it would. Yeah. And I know that a lot of people with OCD develop depression because of this feeling of hopelessness of your own thoughts. And so in my time of depression as well, the things that really helped me was taking things off my plate or just allowing me to spend more time kind of healing. Which a lot of that was with my internship, just saying, like, let's just put this on hold. It sounds like you've got a lot going on. Let's just be praying for you and supporting you and giving you a phone call or giving you space. But let's just take that one pressure away.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's interesting you're saying that people praying would often be like, oh, please God, take this away from Jemimah. How does that make you feel when it hasn't been taken away?
Good question. It has been hard, and it's been hard seeing other people experience healing as well. And I think that anybody who's experienced a physical illness and then heard of someone who's been miraculously recovered from this illness, it can be really hard of why not me? And that's definitely something I've had, hearing people who've had mental illnesses had healing prayed for them and then just being completely healed from that and feeling like, oh, why not me? Yeah. And I think, something that helped me kind of think through this healing is that, when Jesus came, he didn't heal every single person he encountered, and he did heal people. And it also says in the Bible that he did it for the glorification of God. Any of those healings wasn't necessarily for that person, but for God's glory, and even for a lesson as well. But God did save everyone, and he did die on the cross for everyone, even if he didn't heal everyone.
So do you think it's then, like, do we need to be a bit more cautious about praying for healing, or you think that's still a valid response when someone opens up about something?
Yeah, interesting. I think that it is a balance because as Christians, we definitely believe that God can heal and that it's happened, and the power of prayer. And so we don't want to negate the incredible power of prayer, but we want to do it in a way that is sensitive to the people who we're talking to, and not this feeling of pressure of healing is going to be the answer. But sometimes it's not going to be healing, and it's going to be therapy, and it's going to be love, and it's going to be support. But that is also kind of a journey of maybe not healing, but a journey of kind of recovering or a journey of getting better as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, like you say, it may not be a miraculous healing. And even having that realization that it may not be like I said, miraculous healing. It might be a healing that actually comes through therapy or medication or just better learning to deal with things as well, kind of thing. But I really like the fact that you're reminded of the fact that Jesus didn't heal everyone, but he did come and save everyone. And that isn't taken away from anyone. That is available for everyone. This has just been, it's been amazingly eye-opening chat. To wrap things up then, you're saying about how kind of you're in this kind of newer space where you're dealing with your OCD better, and so there's more time in between when it's kind of really flaring up and really affecting you. How does your faith kind of look and play out day to day in this kind of new space, knowing that it's not gone, your OCD is still there, but how does your faith kind of sustain you and carry you through as you continue your journey?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be sustaining that faith as well, because there is always that risk that I will go back and that my OCD will get a lot worse and I'll go back to that point as well. But I think now I have a better understanding of my faith and tools that I know that if I did go back and things did get a lot worse, that I would have what I needed to get myself out again. Yeah, and it's also really changed for me being a youth leader and working with young people who talk about mental health, and young people know mental health so well, of being able to talk from my own experience of now, it's not only my faith, but I'm also spending time with others talking about their faith, and being able to encourage that in a way, that isn't going to make them feel like, healing is the only thing, or make them feel like, therapy is the only thing, or going to see a psychologist and medication is the solution, and that there's no space for God in mental health, but this is for the professionals, and then God is for everything else.
Yeah.
But that God is in both. And then the same that it's not only God, that there is so much value in understanding the brain and talking to someone. And there is a lot of stigma about medication as well, that I probably have experienced that in the church about talking about medication. But it's been a really good decision for me. And it's also something that we take medication when we're physically ill.
Yeah.
And we don't just pray for healing from God when we're physically ill. We also go to the doctor, and we also take medication to make us feel better. Yeah,
that's really good. You said that, you kind of in this place where you've got better tools and better knowledge of your faith, kind of thing that would hopefully help you see you through that better if your OCD did get worse. What are some of those kind of tools and things that you think make you better equipped if you were to face it again? Yeah,
absolutely. I think in prayer, being an active listener in prayer, so when I'm calling out, God, can you please help me? He might not take away my intrusive thoughts, but he may be guiding me or supporting me in a way. So I need to be praying and then listening, and not just calling out in these prayers. But yeah, as I said, in my OCD, and I think even people with anxiety, would challenge you is, even though it feels like ridiculous, because it is so, you're in this space of being so anxious right now, the thought of praying seems so crazy, like this is the most important thing. Prayer has absolutely helped me in those times of feeling really, really anxious.
That's amazing. Jemimah, thank you so much for sharing your story with you. It's an incredibly eye-opening story, and something I hope will help people understand what OCD is a lot more, but also just that encouragement that, God can actually see you through this, even when it feels like your mind is out of control. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful or encouraging, we'd love for you to drop a like on it and share it around. You can see way more content on our website, anxiousfaith.org, where you can listen to each episode of the podcast, find more resources, and read our blog all around mental health and faith. Be sure to also follow us on socials via the links in the description, and subscribe to our channel so you can be kept in the loop when we're dropping more content for you. Thanks so much, and God bless.